What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football predictions for the upcoming 2025 college football season. Up next is the SMU Mustangs. SMU coming off a very surprising season last year in 2024. Not just making the college football playoff, they were eliminated in the first round, but obviously making the college football playoff in your first year as a Power 4 team, that is a huge accomplishment for this SMU team. And then also they went to the ACC Championship, lost a close one to Clemson, but what they did last year was just definitely a lot of big accomplishments here for this SMU football team and this program, especially in their first year in the Power 4. Can they do what they did last year in 2025? Well, before we get into the predictions for SMU, first of all, let me give you my thoughts about this SMU team. You look at this offense, they didn't really lose a whole lot from last year. Kevin Jennings is back at quarterback. That is definitely huge for this SMU team. We saw how good Kevin Jennings was, and then sometimes he'll have his bad games, but yeah, he was really good for them last year, and I think this offense has a chance to be, once again, pretty good like it was from last year. Defensively, the defensive line, I think, is going to be pretty good for this SMU team. It will be pretty solid, but the secondary, I think that's probably where the concern is for SMU. They lost some good players in the secondary, but maybe they'll have some holes there to fill in from the transfer portal. But yeah, this is a very well coached SMU team, and they kind of showed us last year that they definitely do belong in the ACC, and then also definitely as a Power 4 team. So let's now get to their schedule here for 2025. Here is the schedule for SMU, and again, they were 11-3 last year in 2024. So let's go game by game, and I'll give you my official prediction for this SMU team for 2025. And they will start things off with East Texas A&M. That's an FCS team there on August the 30th. Should be a pretty easy win for SMU, so I think they start off 1-0 pretty easily with that win. And then they get ready for a big non-conference game out of the Big 12 against Baylor on September 6th. This will be a home game here for SMU. This should be a pretty exciting game. Baylor is a team that I think a lot of people are sleeping on in 2025. This Baylor team could be a top 25 team. They have a lot of experience coming back, and they added a bunch of additions in the transfer portal. I mean, obviously, they do return their starting quarterback as well, so this is going to be a really good Baylor team, potentially a dark horse team in the Big 12. So I think this will be a pretty tough game for SMU, but I think SMU playing at home, that's probably the difference in this one. This is just a 50-50 game. It's pretty much a toss-up for me, and I think these are two really well-coached teams. So with that being said, I do trust Kevin Jennings a little bit more than Baylor's quarterback, and I think SMU does get it done. So I'm going to say they probably only win it by like 4 points, though. I think SMU will probably be favored, but I think it will be a game where Baylor has a chance to knock off SMU early on in the season, and that's a game that probably can decide whoever goes on to have like a pretty good year and potentially probably can win their conference. Maybe the loser doesn't have like a bad year, but just a pretty decent season. But yeah, SMU, I think they improved to 2-0 with a win over Baylor, and then they take care of business on the road at Missouri State, which is kind of interesting that they're playing on the road against an FCS team in Missouri State, but they should be able to win that game. So I got SMU now improving to 3-0. After that, they play TCU on the road on September the 20th. So they got a couple of Big 12 teams actually here in the month of September, Baylor and TCU. TCU is going to be a pretty solid team. They're not going to be like as good, I think. They're probably not going to be as good as Baylor is going to be this year in 2025, but this is on the road. It's a very tough place to play, and I know TCU is looking for revenge in this game. They lost to SMU last year, and this has kind of become a rivalry, it seems like, because both of these teams are in the state of Texas. So it seems like they're playing this game every year. So yeah, TCU, I think it's going to be a pretty tough game. This is kind of a toss-up for me as well. I've kind of been back and forth on this game. So with that being said, this is a very tough game to call. So with that being said, I think home field advantage might be the difference here, and I'm actually going to go with TCU. I think it's probably a low-scoring defensive game, but I got to go with the Horned Frogs. And I think how they do this, I think they probably split those two games out of the Big 12 in the non-conference. They probably probably beat Baylor, but then they lose to TCU. But it could be the opposite. They probably lose to Baylor, and then they probably beat TCU on the road. That's just how I think they'll start out the season. They could probably get off to an undefeated start. There's no shock there that they could probably get off to a 4-0 start, but I think it's probably going to be 3-1 at best. So SMU, I got them losing their first game there on the road at TCU, and that puts them at 3-1. They get their first bye week before playing Syracuse at home on October 4th, and this is their first official ACC game to open up conference play. So yeah, they don't play a conference game until the month of October, which that is a really long time to wait, but Syracuse is going to be a pretty solid team as well, but they do have some question marks at the quarterback position. Kyle McCord is gone and everything, so I don't know if Syracuse will be as good as they were from last year in the passing game. But maybe their running game actually will be pretty solid, but, I think SMU playing at home, especially after a loss to TCU a couple weeks ago, I think the bye week does help them out get that rest, and I think SMU comes in a little bit fired up, and I think they beat Syracuse not really easily. I'm going to say they probably win a game that's probably a couple of touchdowns, so about 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that particular win range. And then after that, they play Stanford on October the 11th. This will be a home game for SMU. Don't think Stanford is going to be all that great this year, so this should be a pretty easy win for SMU. It's probably a blowout. This is probably the biggest win that they'll have against an ACC team on this schedule for 2025. So I got SMU improving to 5-1, and then they get ready for a big-time road test against Clemson on October 18th. Of course, these two teams met in a rematch from last year in the ACC championship. Clemson obviously, dominated the first half in the conference title game last year, and then second half, SMU nearly came back and beat this Clemson team. So I think this game is going to have a chance to be a pretty close game, but you look at this Clemson team, a lot of experience, especially with Cade Klubnik back at quarterback. This offense for Clemson is going to be really tough to stop, and that could be a pretty big, concern for SMU's secondary against the passing attack of Clemson. And yeah, this Clemson team I think is going to be really good this year. And also playing at home, you can never go against Clemson when they're playing at home. So I got to go with the Tigers in this one. I think it will be a close game, but I'm going to say Clemson probably pulls away by the fourth quarter, and they at least win this game by like 10 points. So I got Clemson giving SMU their second loss of the season. That puts them at 5-2, and then they go on the road to play Wake Forest on October 25th. So they got back-to-back road games with Clemson and Wake Forest. Wake Forest is kind of a trap game, especially after coming off a really tough loss to Clemson. You're kind of all beat up a little bit. I think SMU probably does start off slow, but Wake Forest is a team that I don't think will be an easy game. It probably is a game where SMU gets off to a slow start, but I don't think Wake Forest is going to be all that improved this year. So with that being said, SMU I think gets the win here on the road at Wake Forest. Again, I wouldn't be shocked if SMU did slip up here because it's right after playing a physical Clemson team, the last week, and you're kind of all beat up. And usually when you play those talented teams that are physical defenses, that really kind of goes, against you, the next week. So SMU definitely has to keep an eye on that Wake Forest game. And you never know, they might be looking ahead to this game against Miami, which is their next game on November 1st. Miami is going to also be a talented team. I mean, they have a lot of new faces, though. They lost so much from last year. Maybe they won't be as good as they were from last year. It could be a little bit of a step back for Miami, but this should be a Miami team that could be right there around 9 or 10 wins. And I think Miami definitely is a playoff contender. They got Carson Beck, the transfer, coming in from Georgia. Really, how good is he going to be for this Miami offense? That'll definitely be the question mark. If Cam Ward was still here at Miami, I would probably pick the Hurricanes to win this game, but I think SMU playing at home. This is probably the reason why I'm kind of having a hard time with this game. So with that being said, I think SMU 50-50 game. It's a close one, but I got to go with the Mustangs here. I think SMU does come in a little bit fired up for this one. It potentially is a top 10 showdown. Maybe it could be a top 15 matchup as well. Again, I think SMU, after pretty much, looking ahead to the Miami game, they come in more focused than they did in the Wake Forest game. They're still going to escape with a win against Wake Forest, but I think they come come in fired up for this game, and they come in and they beat Miami here in a close one. So I got SMU now improving to 7-2. After that, they play on the road at Boston College on November 8th. Boston College was a pretty surprising team last year in 2025, 2024, I should say. Boston College is a team that can run the football pretty well, but I think SMU's defensive line, it probably could be the difference in this game. Boston College is a team that's not going to, be an easy game for SMU, but it's a game that I think SMU definitely is the better team still. So with that being said, I think SMU actually gets a close win here against Boston College. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Wake Forest or Boston College, one of these two teams probably can pull off an upset here on October 25th and November 8th, and then also Cal, which we'll get to in here in just a moment. But I got SMU improving to 8-2. After that, they get a bye week before playing Louisville on November 22nd. This is actually a pretty good spot for the second bye week before playing Louisville. Louisville could be a top 25 team. They have a bunch of new faces, though, on the transfer portal. They got Miller Moss coming in. I think Louisville's going to be a pretty decent team, but, this is also kind of a tougher game to call, just like the Miami game is, and I think home field advantage will be the difference. So I'm going to go with SMU to beat Louisville here. I think it is a close game. It does come down to the wire just like the Miami game does, but I got to go with SMU just because they're playing at home. And then they close things out on the road at Cal on November 29th. This is a California team that was a pretty solid team last year. A lot of people kind of expect them to be a dark horse team. They could be because of how easy their schedule sets up for them, but they lost their starting quarterback, and that's obviously kind of a concern there for Cal. So they probably don't have a proven quarterback in the backfield. But maybe this is a Cal team that will be pretty good on defense. They probably can have a defense that can slow this SMU offense down. But, I know this is out west and everything, but SMU is kind of not too far away from the state of Texas all the way to California. It's not really that far, just like some other teams like Louisville, Miami. Those two teams have to really travel out far and everything, but SMU is kind of not that far away, so I think this is a close game. I wouldn't be surprised if SMU did slip up here, but I got to go with SMU. I think they're the better team here, and I think Kevin Jennings does make a big play here. I think this game definitely goes into the fourth quarter, and it's a game that potentially SMU can lose, but I'm going to go with the Mustangs here. So I got SMU closing out the season with 5 straight wins after losing to Clemson on October 18th, and I got them finishing 10-2, and I know that seems like a pretty high prediction, but it's definitely under from where they were last year. Last year they were 11-1, and they did surprise me last year. This year I think they're going to be once again pretty good. Again, I don't really feel confident of this prediction. I think I can see SMU probably slipping up here on some of these games on the schedule. Maybe they split between Miami and Louisville. Maybe they lose to Miami and then probably beat Louisville, but it could be the opposite. Maybe they beat Miami but lose to Louisville, but they probably slip up in one of those road games. Wake Forest, Boston College, and Cal, those are games that are late in the season, and they can probably potentially slip up, especially after losing to Clemson on October 18th after getting all beat up. So I think that is definitely a possibility. SMU can probably go 9-3 or 8-4, but I'm going to go with 10-2 for this team. So that is my prediction for SMU for 2025. Do you guys agree or disagree with this prediction for SMU? And also give me your prediction for this team down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.